everyone, and welcome to today's Catalyst Story session, Creative Economy. I'm your host and the director of Catalyst Story Institute, Nikki Coble, and our guest today is Kris Lefcoe. She is a multi-award winning writer-director whose work has screened at South by Southwest, TIFF, IFC, the Sundance Channel, and Art Basel Miami. She has self-produced her pilot, Giving Up, which won top prizes at the New York Television Festival and Seriesfest, and she made her TV directing debut on the NBC comedy Superstore. Welcome, Kris.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
We're so glad to have you. And just to hop in to this really busy time and sort of get our bearings on what it's like to do some very scrappy filmmaking or modest budget filmmaking. I love your background. I know you have a lot of experience doing this as well as bigger budget shows on NBC. So, what is creative economy and how does it come into play when producing a pilot?
Well, I think creative economy is, most importantly, if someone's going to be setting out to make something that they can use as a calling card, I think the most important things that they can think about are, first of all, really distilling your voice, being clear about your goals for the project, and figuring out how to capture your voice in as little screen time as possible and spending it as little money as possible, but having the biggest impact with whatever it is that you produce, that so that it will open doors for you. So I think that it begins at the level of just your concept and what you're going to make. If you like in terms of the economics of creative economy, if you don't want to spend a lot of money, then write something for what you already have. Write something if you have access to, a restaurant because your uncle owns it or whatever, then set it in a restaurant. It's so much easier to come up with something using what you have on hand and then really fully realize it and make the production easy than to write something that's way beyond what you can potentially pull off with your resources and then have to start trying to eliminate things or compromise every step of the way down the road. So I think a piece like this is really, you want to capture who you are as a creator, and you don't need a lot of screen time to do that. You don't need to shoot a full pilot, you don't need to shoot a 1 hour, you don't even need to shoot a half an hour, you don't even need to shoot a 15-minute. You can do it in like 3 minutes. And I think that by using the tools of creative economy in your concept and your writing and making sure that your voice is coming through loud and clear, that's going to be the most effective thing that you can invest any time and resources into actually making.
And absolutely, I know we've talked about it before about clarifying your goal before you start. What is it that you're trying to do? What is the ultimate end goal? Is it something that you're trying to create a teaser for something that you've written or you want someone to pay you to write? Knowing that before you jump in is going to help you budget for what you absolutely have to have, right?
Exactly. It may be that you're an actor and you're not getting the roles you want, and your goal is to write yourself a role that's gonna wow everybody, and show everybody what you can do as an actor. Or if you have a very specific point of view as a comedy creator, then and it's something that like you keep submitting scripts and nobody quite gets your tone, and it becomes like a proof of concept that your tone works, that I've done that before. I want something to combine laughter and sadness and poignancy, and on the page nobody knows whether you can actually achieve that, and you can just go ahead and make it and say, look, see, it's funny and it's sad, and then nobody can argue when you're in a room pitching the show. Or maybe you just want to make something to open some doors professionally, and then in which case you want to make sure that it looks professional and that it can get into some festivals and hopefully win. And if you win awards, boom, like so many doors open for you. I mean, people in Hollywood love awards. So festivals like Catalyst and other indie content festivals are great opportunities to show your work and maybe, get something into deadline, and all of a sudden everybody wants to meet you. So,
Hmm.
yeah, clarify those goals and make sure that what you're shooting is going to help you in that path.
Hmm. And there's one other thing that you mentioned before, which I think is just so smart: the good, fast, cheap rule. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think that's like the hard and fast rule of production in general, that people who are dealing with lower budgets really need to keep in mind. And the rule is good, fast, cheap, pick two. So you can have good and fast, but it won't be cheap. You can have good and cheap, but it won't be fast. And what's the other one? You can have,
What do you
well,
say?
I don't like the other one because it's not good. So I'm not
Right.
interested
Fast and
in.
cheap as it won't be good. Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
because of that, it means, you need to give yourself, if you want it to be good and you don't want to spend a lot of money, it means you need to spend time on it. And that
Mhm,
means mostly spending time in the writing and making sure that it's right on the page before you go and start shooting anything.
mhm,
Um, and in the prep, by devoting a lot of time to scouting those locations at the right time of day, going back, figuring out what the light's going to be like, figuring out what sound issues you might have, because you're just not going to be able to extend your time on production, because that's
mhm,
when you've got actors and you've got gear and you've got crew. And, you need to just be like moving quickly on the day so that you can shoot and be efficient and get what you need to tell your story on that shoot day. And then also give yourself time for post. If you're working with an editor, you want to be able to give that editor that we're going to have another job unless you're like paying them enough to not have another job. So you're going to have to give them like a long expanse of time to, come up with an assembly, come up with a cut, um, you know, have experiment with things, put things in a different order. All of that takes a lot of time, and if you're rushing things and have like an unrealistic deadline for when you want to have this thing finished, you can't have it be good, fast, and cheap.
mhm,
So that's a really important rule. And I would say, in addition to that about post, if it's especially if it's one of the earlier projects that you've done, but really for anybody, um, keeping room for reshoots is highly advisable, and there's no shame in reshoots.
mhm,
There's everybody does reshoots pretty much, sooner or later. It's something where, like, if you have come up to you're to the point of a rough cut and everything's working, but there's like a beat missing, like you're just not feeling something when you need to feel it. You can, if you have left room for time and a little bit of money or whatever favors to
mhm,
get a reshoot, you can add so much to your project by understanding what's being communicated, what parts of the story are there, and what's not landing, and you can fix it by shooting an extra scene, writing
mhm,
something new, inserting a beat that wasn't there. Like, for example, on one of my projects, I was working with an editor who got this piece of advice from Jay Duplass on a project that he had directed, which was like, I just need to see them hug. I feel like I need to see them hug. And he then turned and said to me about my project that was about a couple, I feel like I need to see them hug at some point. It's going to get us more behind them. And, reshoot, boom, write a scene where they hug. It's so helpful. So
mhm.
it's not the end of the world, and I highly recommend it.
I love that. It's all so helpful, and I think we'll definitely dig into more of that as we go through. But it's so common that we get so excited about an idea that in the writing stage we might rush because we just want to get to those pages and we haven't fully developed the story, or we just want to shoot it before we've thought about what we're going to need to cover and what we're going to need to hand the editor to make sure that it's all there. And so there are little points along the way that we'll talk about, which are moments where you need to take that time, that extra beat, to think things through and to make sure that you're setting yourself up in an economic way, an efficient way of distribution of energy and resources, especially if you're writing something and you're realizing that everything is taking place in locations you don't have access to, right? Can you make it on the moon? Maybe, but the moon's going to look like what your budget's going to look like. So, how can you adjust accordingly? And I think all of that is just super smart. Are there any hard and fast rules for a successful low budget production?
I have some. I mean, I sort of personally have some rules. And I think the first one, obviously, the good, fast, cheap one, that's hard and fast. For
Hmm.
me, um, my rules are that if you can pay people,
Hmm.
even if it's like $40. Um, it makes a world of difference for some reason psychologically. If someone has agreed to do something for $40, it's different than them doing it as a favor, even though
Right.
it's still kind of a favor and $40 isn't much money. If you're paying them $40 and you my second rule is do the paperwork. Give everybody a deal memo, get everything signed, sealed, and delivered because it professionalizes the relationship and you're just going to find people show up and do the job in a more professional capacity. They won't just flake on you as much if you're paying them $40 and they've signed a deal memo. For some reason, it just makes a
Hmm.
big difference. When you're asking friends for favors, like even if it feels silly, well, I'm paying you $40 to come out for this one day and bring sandwiches or whatever it is. Um, and you've got a contract with your newly formed production company, and it just makes people not call in the morning and be like, I'm hungover, I'm not coming.
Right.
That's a rule.
Right.
And another rule is sound is more important than picture, which
Mm.
is kind of a maybe counterintuitive. Picture quality is obviously really important, and I'm like totally a stickler about shot composition and lighting and making sure everything looks great. um, but honestly, these days when people watch so much stuff on YouTube and everything, they'll watch something that looks crappy, but if the sound is not there, like if the
Mhm.
sound is noisy or distorted
Mhm.
or a lot of just crashes and bangs all over it, it's unwatchable and no one will watch it.
Yep.
So make sure that you have the real sound gear, and it's so cheap to get sound gear, and you can usually get it for free.
Mhm.
Um, and someone who knows how to use it, and that can be, you. It's not hard to figure out, but make sure that you're testing levels, turning things off, refrigerators, etc. Just make sure that you get clean sound on the day.
Mhm.
Um, and another rule for me is to feed people really well, because when people are coming out for not their usual rate, and when you're not able to pay everyone what they're really worth, it's really important to treat them so well, and food is a big part of that.
Yep.
The film and television industry is an industry where people expect to be fed, and there's a reason for that because you get so focused, you can't be taking care of your own just like human needs.
Yep.
So make sure that there's good lunch that's not pizza.
Mhm.
Pizza is only acceptable as a second meal if you're going long, which, by the way, don't go long if
Yeah.
you're not paying people
Yep.
their proper rate. Just make sure that if it's a 12-hour day, that it's a 12-hour day. Better is
Mhm.
a 10-hour day, but don't go long. But if you do go long, then fine, get a pizza. But otherwise, no pizza for lunch. Everyone who works in this business, that's just like a big red flag to serve pizza for lunch. But it can be free. It can be like your aunt is making sandwiches. As long as the sandwiches are great sandwiches, make sure that that's just really good food there. And craft service, even if it's just like get a few things yourself and bring it to set. Have some snacks around. It's just how it
Mhm.
is, and a big thing of coffee. You don't want to be sending people out on Starbucks runs because it's a requirement. People need caffeine on a film set. So like get one of those big urn things and just have a lot of coffee available. Okay. So then my last rule is just have as few unit moves as possible because
Yeah.
especially if you're shooting somewhere like in New York where I live, you know, 3 locations that are in 3 different neighborhoods, your entire day is spent getting from A to B,
Yep.
and you're not doing much shooting.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
what I that's those are just off the top of my head. Those are some rules.
Those are so great, and it's so true also, especially when you talk about the catering, there are a lot of different dietary sensitivities now, and it's hard to cover all of those, but those are conversations you need to have because with your cast. Hopefully the cast is small and you don't have to have that conversation with too many people, but you definitely need to know what's available in the area. If someone's like, I won't be able to have that pasta, I'm gluten free. Is there somewhere where I can go and you can give me a stipend to go get whatever I need to get or whatever that is? There's lactose intolerance, there's everything. And certainly cheese pizza is going to be the worst thing. Like you said,
Yeah.
unacceptable for so many reasons. But it's important because
Especially with cast, I find, especially with cast, you need to make sure that your cast has in their body whatever they need to perform, amazingly. So
Mhm.
it's a good thing to kind of reach out in advance and be like, what do you tend to like for lunch? Or like, what do you tend to like to have around if you're getting low energy or whatever? Just make sure that it's there.
Yep, absolutely. That's so smart. If you're filming with relatively no money, where should it go? And if you upgrade to a more modest budget, whatever that threshold is going to be, what would be the add-ons?
Well, I think if you're, there are just certain bare minimums of what you're going to need to spend money on, food being one of them.
Mhm.
Um, but I think something people forget about, which is my number one thing that absolutely must exist for every production, is insurance.
Oh, yes.
So you cannot shoot without insurance. Don't even consider it. It is not worth it. Something goes wrong and it can ruin your life. So make sure that you are properly insured. And that doesn't have to cost a lot of money. And it is possible to get insurance for free. So if you are going to be spending some money on anything and you don't have other avenues for insurance, then there are websites like insuremyproduction.com that will just do one-offs for a single production. And I mean, it used to cost like $1,000 or something to get like $1 million insurance to cover you.
Mhm.
But one thing that you can do is if you know somebody with, like, for example, a commercial production company that has a blanket insurance policy and you're very good friends with this person, maybe
Mhm.
they will allow you to run your production through their company and just add you for those shoot dates to their insurance. And
Mhm.
usually, I mean, I've done this many times in my life. And then they become, producers of your thing. Then they don't have to take any ownership of it. You just make whatever deal with them seems fair. But maybe they'll just do that for like a modest fee, like $200 or something. Or
Mhm.
maybe they'll just take a producer credit and there, boom, you're insured. But just don't
Right.
shoot without insurance.
Right. And it's different, I think, because some people who are working in the non-union space may not know that, and I don't know what the rules may be, but coverage has to be there. I know for small projects for SAG, it's general liability, it's third-party property insurance, as well as the workers' comp. And it can be a lot. It can be a headache, and you got to kind of start that process ahead of time because having that will tell SAG that you are ready and you mean business, and you can't have that conversation after you shot. You have
Right.
to start that paperwork and that process before you want to be shooting because that will keep you on the right side of of the union.
Absolutely. And any locations that you're going to be using, you need to get the location added in your insurance. And a lot of, like, let's just say, I got the guy who owns the bar down the street said I could shoot there. But when it comes down to the nitty gritty of actually shooting there, you want to come in and say, and it can help, make your case to be allowed to shoot there. We're going to be covered with this $1 million of insurance. So you don't have to worry about anything. If we break something, you're
Mhm.
covered, and you make sure that it's all the, I's are dotted, et cetera, on those contracts to make sure that they're covered. And uh, what was the other thing that you were just saying? So for locations, and it's something that you need to think about a lot in advance and make sure that everything's covered. I know I had something else. It'll probably fly into my
Right.
head later.
Well, one thing on that front is that it definitely does help the locations to know that you have that base covered because yes, we'll be careful. Yes, we will be so aware of it, but you're also if you're renting any equipment, something happens and somebody trips over the leg of that stand that didn't have a sandbag on it and that
Right, and the
knocks
light
over a
smashes, and yeah,
bunch of glasses.
that
Or
reminded me of, yeah, that reminded me of what I was going to say, which was also add anyone. Let's say that you've hired a DP and they're bringing their own camera, or like you are renting a camera but you want a certain lens and your DP's bringing that from somewhere else or whatever. So you
Mhm.
add all of those extra pieces of gear into your insurance policy, and then you can have the gear that you want, and you can convince the, for example, sound person who's coming out for way below their rate and is bringing their sound rig, you can at least guarantee them that that rig is protected if somebody drops the coffee urn I mentioned earlier
Mhm.
into their, recording device. So
Yeah,
it's just key.
absolutely. And it's definitely something that should be discussed in advance. For instance, I had a DP who could insure his own gear, but I had other things that were happening that were protecting me at the locations. And the hardest part, if you're able to, if you have any money at all and are able to kind of look at the LLC side of things to separate your personal self and all of your money and everything you will ever own from the business that is this enterprise of whatever you're
Exactly.
shooting. If that's possible, it's definitely worth looking at
Yeah.
because it's your friends. Yes, of course, my friends would never sue me, my friends, but then my friend tripped over an errant cord that wasn't
Right.
taped
And there
down,
are medical bills.
broke their leg and smashed their teeth. They're going to sue you, and it has to be part of the LLC. If
Right.
you, I mean, I know we're
That's
talking
right.
about low
That's
budgets,
right.
but
It may not be a choice. If they have medical bills, somebody has to pay them,
mhm,
Um,
absolutely.
so, the other things that are worth paying for, getting back to that is, um, well, look, if you can't pay people, the thing that you do have to offer people is credit.
Hmm.
So I always advise people who are trying to make something quality with no money, um, hire somebody to do the job that's just above the job that they usually get paid to do. And then they're getting a credit, and it's a legitimate credit. It's on IMDb. If you get someone who really wants to be a production designer and they're working as a set dresser on a TV show or a film or whatever, and they don't have any production design credits, hire them to be your production designer and give them a production designer credit. And that's going to be totally worth it for them, and you don't have to feel guilty about not paying them because you're giving them something that is credits are currency.
Hmm.
So because once they have that IMDb credit, they can then parlay that into stepping up in their career. So it's the same on in every department. Hire a boom op to be your sound recordist, hire someone who shoots but usually only gets to AC to be your DP. As long as you've seen some stuff they've shot but they don't have any DP credits, perfect, this is going to be your first DP credit. Um, so you know take full advantage of that, and you can also give out associate producer credits like they are candy to anyone who does anything for you.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, anyone in the industry sort of knows that that's sort of what associate producer means. It's a vague, it doesn't mean necessarily any particular role. It's just, here's a credit for, oh, you had to, like, someone locked their keys in their thing and you needed to, like, drive and go to their house and go and pick it up as a favor, and like, boom,
Hmm.
associate producer.
Yep, yep, that's so
So
smart.
that's a little secret. But so yeah, and if there is one thing that I would say is worth paying for, if you really can't get what you need without paying for it, it's cast.
Hmm.
So cast is always worth paying for, the right actor, um, where gear isn't always necessarily worth paying for, because ultimately, okay, you want a particular shot, you want a particular lens, you want a crane, you want a, dolly truck, whatever it is, the piece of gear that you think you really, really need to tell your story. If that performance that you're shooting with that gear is not compelling or realistic or making anybody feel anything, nobody gives a shit how amazing the shot is.
Yeah.
So always value cast over gear.
So if you're crowdfunding, how do you know what your baseline is versus what the flexible goals would be that you want to raise funds for? Should there be a buffer for incidentals as well?
Well, I've never actually crowdfunded anything, but I know that, in any production, when you never have as much money as you want. Even
Hmm.
if your budget is like 25 million, you really needed 30, you know?
Hmm. Yeah.
So I think that the key is to prioritize your production needs and just make sure that it's all about what your story really requires in order to be told well.
Hmm.
So again, like, fancy shots may not be required. Sometimes a fancy specialty shot is required, but that's kind of few and far between in those
Hmm.
cases. So I would do two budgets, your dream budget, like everything that you want to have. And then it's the same with a shot list, your dream shot list of all the shots that you want to have. with the cool, way of entering that's like through a thing, whatever.
Yeah.
But then you prioritize and you say, this is what I have to have in order to land my story.
Yep.
I don't have to have an aerial shot to land the story. I can do it this way. So always have those two budgets,
Mm-hmm.
and definitely budget for contingency. I mean, the sort of industry minimum of what should go into a budget for contingency is 10% across the
Mm-hmm.
board. And I would never really go below that because, stuff happens.
Mm-hmm. Well, and depending on your production and where we are in this pandemic, COVID kind of inflates it a little bit if testing has to happen at all. Hopefully that won't be a thing for much longer. I know
Yeah.
for me, when we had our production, we shot 20 episodes, and definitely batteries were a thing that getting the great sound, a lot of great recordists don't want to go past a certain number of bars because it could conk out in the middle of a take and they don't want to lose that for you. So we were constantly feeding batteries into the thing, and they're not inexpensive, right? Once they add up day after day. Also, transportation, if you're ending late, it's really not fair for everyone to go, hey, it's 1 a.m. Good luck on that subway. How are people getting home? What are the contingencies for that? And that definitely added to our budget in ways that we didn't
Yes.
anticipate because we didn't have that buffer.
Yeah. Well, usually, a good sound person will take batteries into account when they give you a quote.
Hmm.
Um, and then they'll bring them themselves because they want to make sure that they're there. But yeah, those are the type of, expendables that you got to make sure that you have.
Right. And certainly, I would imagine now, if I had thought of it, that taking advantage of the communities where you trust it, right? If you have another friend or other friends who have been making their own content before, ask them what mistakes they've made and benefit from that information without kind of picking everyone's brain and bothering everyone. You can ask certain communities and say, hey, what did you forget that you wish you did differently?
Yeah,
Because that can help you if it's your first time. Think about the things that you wouldn't know until you make those mistakes. It might be able to edit them down for you.
absolutely. I mean, I feel like I love it when people discuss their failures. And I'm always like telling everything about like my production fails
Yeah.
because you learn so much from those, and then everyone else can learn so much from those that it's just going to raise the bar of what you can do next time and what everybody can do.
What about casting effectively? How can you do that?
Well, a really good tip that somebody gave me once was, you know, if you let's say you're trying to get some name into your thing because you want people to see it,
Mm,
um, then it's a really good idea to offer a role to an actor that is totally different from what they've done before. Um, don't go to the guy who always plays the like gangster or heavy and offer them a role for no money playing a gangster or a heavy. But watch that person's work and realize that they're also funny and
mm,
that they've never done a comedy, and offer them a comedy. I
mhm.
guarantee you're going to get a lot better response,
Right,
and vice versa. Have
right.
I all I almost in everything I've ever made have cast a comedian in a role that's not a funny role.
Mhm.
Because I just love working with comedians in general
Yeah.
because they've got great timing and they tend to be depressed. So there's a lot of depth there that you can dig into.
So
Uh,
true. Yes.
but yeah, I mean, and they sort of, you know, they just get excited about doing something they haven't done or haven't had the
Right.
opportunity to, show off their other range.
Mhm.
Um, so that's a good way if you're trying to sort of cast up and get people in it that have more credits than maybe you think, that you may think that they're out of your league. Write a great, brilliant script and offer it to somebody who is like the non-obvious choice, and you might be surprised who you can cast. Um, and I think that, you know, sometimes you get bogged down with the idea of like, well, this person's a name, but they're a little older or younger than the role, and like how much, how many Twitter followers do they have, or are they going to be worth this in a foreign market, or the kinds of things that people get bogged down with when they're casting.
Mm.
And I got a great piece of advice from Mike White, who I don't know if you know, he made White Lotus, um,
Oh, yeah.
like wrote and directed and created White Lotus, and he wrote School of Rock, and he's done all kinds of amazing stuff. Um, Enlightened, the HBO show. So he was a mentor of mine, and I was in the middle of casting something and getting bogged down with those types of questions about like star value and, you know, who's going to invest based on this name and whether the person feels like the character or not and all this stuff. And he just said, Kris, just cast the best actor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's fantastic advice.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously those other things matter, but bottom line, if you're trying to create something that's great, cast the best actor.
Yeah.
Another thing that I'd say about casting is if you have an idea that involves a lot of improv or you're excited to do improv on set, make sure that you're casting people who know how to improv, because
Mm-hmm.
not everybody does. Very few people do, actually. It's something that you need to be trained in. It's a very specific skill. Not all comedians can do improv. Stand-up comedians like tend to not be able to do improv unless they've studied improv. So if you want improv, hire improvisers, not just like funny people or comedians or actors.
Yeah.
And then use two
Great.
cameras. Use two
Yeah.
cameras. If you're improvising, use two cameras. It's not that hard to add another camera, and you'll be glad you did, because that moment you won't have to be like, okay, now we have to completely recreate what that magical thing that just happened, because
Yep.
we're turning around and people were talking on top of each other, and it's like very hard to recreate that magic otherwise. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're leaning on improv, then yeah, get two cameras and cast improvisers. That's my casting advice.
That makes so much sense. And I think that it's also very easy for people to say, "Oh, I took a class that one time at the Magnet or the Pit or whatever," but like
Mm-hmm.
who has actual real lived experience, practice doing it?
Yeah.
And if there is a way for you to have part of that be part of an audition, some sort of interactive thing when you're meeting to play with it so you can try it out, because
Yeah.
it might be very dangerous to just leave that to chance.
Well, and
Right?
as you just mentioned too, I think another big important thing about casting for me is meeting people in person,
Hmm.
because you can tell certain things from tape, you can tell certain things from Zoom, you can
Hmm.
tell certain things from their reel, but meeting somebody in person is going to give you more information about whether there's someone you can work with or not, or whether they have the vibe that you need for the
Hmm.
role. I don't really do auditions very much anymore.
Mm.
I tend to just have a coffee with someone I'm thinking of casting, and I can determine from that, you know, combined with their reel,
Right.
whether they're going to be able to do the role better for me than, you know, having an audition.
Mhm, mhm. If they're gonna be a good hang to spend those 12 hours with on set
Well,
that
do you
day.
get each other? Like, can you communicate? You know,
Mhm,
do they get what it's about, what you're trying to say with it, what the character is like, or you know, just do they feel to you like the person, like they have it in them that to
right.
be that person, and can you communicate with them? Those are the
Mhm.
two most important things.
I
As long
love
as you
that.
know that they can act.
Of
You know.
course. Yeah, you're coming to the table with that already vetted and
Yeah,
then making sure the vibe supports that, which is
yeah.
great. I love that. What do you think people tend to forget about when they're rushing to make an indie project happen? What do they forget to
Um,
account for?
I think, you know, some just like really practical things are room tone. Like
1000%.
always get room tone. You know, you wrap a scene and you're like so excited you got it. We got it. We got to go. It's, you know, we got that in the can. That was a really hard one. Oh my god. Blah, blah, blah. Everybody starts buzzing and we're like thinking about what they're doing next. You got to like, nope. Stop. We need room tone. You need
Right.
a minute solid room tone. Um and that's going to make your sound, getting back to sound, so much easier to cut later.
Mhm.
Trust me, get room tone on every scene. Every time you change a location, every time there's something, if like there was a fridge on and now there isn't a fridge on, like get tone with both ways, you know,
Yep.
just be anal about room tone.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing is you should get stills, like behind the scenes shots. That's something that I always would forget about because I just wanted to get the story into the camera and I didn't want a lot of extra people around. Um, but when you are submitting for festivals and stuff or starting to do publicity, you need those shots, those behind the scenes pictures to promote your thing and or even to just like for your application for festivals. Nowadays, I'm sure everybody's snapping pictures all the time for Instagram anyway to be
Right.
um promoting their work. But it's something like get quality set stills. It can also be stuff that you can use for the poster potentially. If you get characters in wardrobe, it's good to get that while you're on set with the actors in their wardrobe. Like maybe have an idea for a poster in advance so that you can like have someone come in and grab it like on a lunch or whatever, or just grab it yourself. So you have the image and you can create artwork based on that. That's something that's easy to forget. And I mean, just like when you're scouting, make sure that you're scouting at the right time of day so that you know what the place is going to look like, especially if you're relying on daylight, which I recommend using the sun as much as you can on low budget productions, which means being very aware of time of day and, what position the sun's going to be in the sky. I mean, like I once for one shot, because I wanted a sun flare, I wanted like something from far off. I wanted a sun flare on part of it, but then to tilt up and into the blue sky. And I went back and scouted that location probably 6 times to figure out what time of day I would need to do that, with the lens to figure out it's got to be flaring at this time. But then I go up and it's like the sky's white by then. This is LA, so blue skies are something you can relatively count on. If it was New York, I would never plan that.
This is not New York.
But anyway, yeah. So scouting with precision is something people forget about. Scouting for sound, like asking the questions about like, we're going to be shooting on a Monday night. Are there parties going on next door usually at that time? Or like, I notice there's a bowling alley down the street that's closed right now. Will it be open on March the 11th? Yeah. So the precision of that type of thing, I think people forget about a lot.
Absolutely. One of the elements that creators neglect to account for is post-production. And by the time they get to it, they've run out of funds. So why is it important to account for that? And how can we set ourselves up optimally in pre-production?
Well, one of the ways is what I mentioned before, which is giving enough time for post in the first place and allowing for potential reshoots. I feel like it's like such a blessing to, once you have a rough cut, have a little window for reshoots because it can make or break your project. Right. And another thing is to plan on a schedule that allows for a lot of screenings during post. You get so close to the material yourself, it's hard to know when something's landing and when it isn't, or if something's moving too fast or too slow. And so you're going to have to be calling in people who didn't read the script, don't know anything about your project, etc., to watch it with you. It's important to watch it with people because you'll start to have ideas about things moving too slow or a joke not being funny. Just with the presence of other humans next to you, whether they say anything or not, you can feel it. So it's important to not eliminate that step and go straight from you and an editor, just working on it to bing, bang, boom, it's on a big screen and you're screening it at a festival. You need to have multiple screenings for multiple cuts, try different things, and, then interview people after the thing and get their take on it and find out what's working for them and not working for them. It doesn't mean you have to like take every note, but you need to understand how it's landing and how it's being perceived by viewers. You may have story points that you're like, did anyone understand that this happened at this point? And they might be like, what no. So okay, reshoot, need that beat, so that's a good thing to plan on, is a lot of screenings. Also, I mean, I think it's great for creators to do their own editing to some extent. I think that, like, especially if you're working with an editor that is a real editor, and they don't have all the time in the world, spending a lot of time with the footage yourself and just learn. Listen, Premiere is really not hard to learn, at least in a rudimentary way. So there are all kinds of ways of getting access to Premiere. And if you can teach yourself Premiere to the point where you can be, looking at your rushes and starting to put things together a little bit, even if it is crappy, it's gonna make you a better director. It's gonna make you a better writer. It's gonna make you a better producer. It just editing and working with footage is gonna make you understand, you know, how you might have written that scene in a better way for next time, and what you didn't need, because all of a sudden there's like all this stuff that you're cutting out that was like way too much. Um, or you're going to understand how to cover a scene better as a director, because this type of shot doesn't cut well with this type of shot. And so next time I'm going to make sure that, the eye lines match or whatever it is.
Right.
And, so I think just spending some time tooling around with the footage yourself and learning how to edit is just a smart thing to do. No matter what sort of job and end goal it is that you're interested in, creating your own TV show, if that's it, still, learning how to be an editor and work with footage and understand the relationship between one shot and the next and one sequence and the next, and the timing, the pace of things, invaluable. But yeah, if you are working with an editor and you want to take some of the time off of their plate, and it's just have all of your selects from the day. Like if you have a script supervisor, great, and you can be like, circle that one, make copious notes. On if you don't have time on set, then you need to take that time yourself before you hand over the stuff to the editor. You want to hand over the footage, and you want to hand over all the notes on, like, I remember on take 3, the actor did something really cool where he kind of laughed in the middle of this take, and it just made it work for me, or whatever it is, it's going to make the editor's job easier. So anything that it's your project, you invest the time and take the time investment off of the people that you're underpaying. Key for guerrilla production. And it'll just make the assembly go faster. And you'll know that you'll have the shots in there that were your select takes. Instead of like having to start from scratch, you have an assembly and it's like, well, this is the wrong take, this is the wrong take, this is the wrong take. And so now that doesn't cut. What this structure you're putting together isn't really going to work. Get good location sound, as we discussed, because that's going to really save you time in the mix, that you won't be like having to fix mistakes first before you start mixing, or like taking out hums and all of that. And it makes your post sound much more expensive if you have to deal with those things. And then, I mean, it's smart to, befriend someone who is a colorist, or start dating a colorist, because color is important, and it can be very expensive. You can also just maybe do some tutorials of color correction in Premiere. If it's not like a very look heavy piece that you're doing, you might be able to just color correct it on your own in Premiere, but invest the time in doing those tutorials online. It's all online. You can learn anything now online. Right. So pay attention to a color correction and make sure that your footage is looking as good as it can. If you're going to embark on, making an independent pilot or making anything, just make sure that it's a story that only you can tell. That doesn't mean it has to be autobiographical, but it just has to perfectly express who you are as a creator and the work that you want to make, so that there is some symmetry there between what you're making here and what you want to make in the future. That's what people want to see. That's what people in Hollywood, listen, everybody has something that is completely unique to them, and it's your point of view. And that is what makes you valuable to the gatekeepers in Hollywood, because nobody's you. So make sure that that's what you put on the screen. And as for the best piece of advice that I've ever gotten from somebody else, this is kind of crazy, but I shadowed David Cronenberg on a film. And if anyone watching this doesn't know who he is, please Google now. But
well, wait.
He was in the middle of shooting a movie, and the budget had completely fallen apart one month into production. And so nobody had, at the time of this conversation, been paid for like over a week. There was over a week, of overdue payment due to everybody involved in the production. But David was so calm and just focused on the work, and you would never know the state of chaos that was going on behind the scenes. And I said, like, how do you stay so calm? under these circumstances, or even just like for some of us, stay so calm in the context of trying to shoot anything. Like it can be a freak out, right?
Hmm.
And he said, because fuck it. That's my motto. My motto is fuck it. It's just a movie.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's not fuck it like don't care enough about your work to, you know, put everything into it, but it's fuck it like don't take yourself too seriously. You know, this is all fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't get bogged down in the extraneous. Do what you came here to do. I
Yeah.
love that. It's great. Thank you for being here and for sharing all this insight with us. We always love talking to you, and we can't wait to see what you do next.
Well, thanks for having me.
Brought to you by the Catalyst Story Institute.